I figured now would be a good time to talk about tools in case I hadn't already. Obviously have a little bit more experience now that I've done the other side start to finish. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what I'm using. Okay, we have the 16-inch breaker bar with a 32mm socket. I know I already mentioned this, that it's the 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch adapter. I'm using most of the bolts. Most of these bolts here are 17mm. You probably will need 2 of them. There's a bolt here and a bolt here for the strut. And is obviously, you might have to put one on one side and one on the other. That being said, what else am I using here that I might not have mentioned? I do have a punch set just for things like this. Go to get this out. You know, not going to want to just, I mean, obviously I can't hit it with the hammer. I am using a 3-pound hammer or a 2-pound hammer. That's really about it. I do have some 19mm wrenches here. Mostly what I'm using those for is to do this, just for leverage. This is something if you try to do, you should be very careful. So I have the box end on the nut, which it's easier to turn the nut rather than try to turn the bolt. You know, you have friction along the entire shaft of the bolt plus the bolt head. So try to turn the nut side. It's going to take quite a little bit of force if these have been on there. You know, if these are factory. One thing that I do besides hitting them with literally hitting them with the big hammer. The other thing I do is this leverage trick. Fit another box end over the open end, the crescent end of the wrench, and it locks in. And that gives you, you know, twice as much leverage. But this is not very solid. This is going to slip around. It's going to want to do things like this. These can be kind of sharp. I usually hold it with one hand and then push on the end with the other hand. But you're going to end up with probably some blood blisters if you decide to do this. This was, if you can see that, smashed the heck out of my knuckle. When I was going to put it back in, I had my hand like this, and I had a socket over the hub assembly, and I was hitting it with the hammer. And just the way I was positioned, I missed, hit the back of my knuckle here, and drove one of these studs into my hand. You should wear gloves. I think a lot of this stuff is probably carcinogenic. Sometimes I just don't have the feel. I wish I had I have some black latex and black vinyl gloves. You know, like medical gloves. Those work great. They rip. You grab another pair, you stick them on, usually 500 to a box or something like that. I mean, you can use them like toilet paper. Those are great. I don't have those with me. I have my rawhide gloves, well, my leather gloves, but I use those for electrical. I don't want to get them all oily. Alright, so this is where the ball joint attaches. This is what I was talking about. This is going to swivel on you, and it actually has to go up underneath the bottom here. So this is where I use my pickle fork. You know, I find a good place to pry. Once the tie rod is on, you can get a nice leverage this way. Obviously right now that doesn't do any good. So you're going to want something to pry with, pry bar. Crowbar would probably be better than anything, even better than this pickle fork. I didn't actually use the pickle fork to separate the ball joint or the tie rod, although I very well could. I'm probably rambling. I apologize if I am. So now you can see the whole project. I'm just popping this out, have the ball joint separated, have the tie rod, steering arm separated, and so that's it. I just got to get this last one out, and if I can do that while you're watching. Be careful because this stuff likes to slam around. Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. Bolts, like I said, Most of them have a 17mm head. These two, which are a little bit longer, this is a 2008 Hyundai Accent hatchback. The longer ones are for the ball joint. When I went to go put it back together, I had a 50-50 chance. I knew that 2 were longer and 2 were shorter. I looked at the piece that it goes through here. You can kind of see it right here, and I lined it up with that, and I convinced myself that the shorter ones must go there, and because you have the 2 pieces of metal here and the steering knuckle. Long story short is I got them backwards. The short ones go to the caliper bracket. The long ones go to the ball joint, where it attaches to the steering knuckle. That's kind of a pain. You get it all back together, and as was my case, the caliper bracket just isn't tightening all the way up because the bolts are too long. You know, they're bottomed out, and the bracket's not tight yet. So then so what I did is I took one out, I took one out, I took one out of the ball joint, I switched them, then I took one out the other one and switched, because I had the whole thing back together. You know, learn from my mistake. I don't know what on skill level, I mean, this is pretty straightforward. It could require a couple specialty tools. So if we're looking at, you know, 1 to 10, 10 being, you need to be a mechanic, you need to have a shop. This is probably somewhere in lower end, 4 to 5, just because, you know, there are a few specialty tools. And then it's just the wherewithal to see it through to the end. You know, there's other good videos on YouTube to watch that shows this whole process. Really learning, seeing how it's done, seeing it firsthand, especially if you can find the exact year, make, and model for your vehicle. This probably is the same for 2006 to 2011, but don't quote me on that. I just see that the bearing and parts are the same, so the process is probably rather similar for that age range. What am I hung up on here? Alright, well, I'm going to see if I can slide this off. I'd love to slide it off on camera for you. No guarantee that will happen. What do I got to pry with? No, I want the other screwdriver, my junky one. A good junk screwdriver. Probably a good choice, like this thing. Doesn't even really have a tip on it anymore. That's it. And it's off. This is your steering knuckle. These 2 holes are where the ball joint attaches. This is where the steering arm attaches. This is what attaches to the strut. These 2 holes here and there are where the caliper bracket attach, and that's the bearing. Well, actually, that's the hub assembly where you see the splines, but this outer area here is the bearing. This doesn't look terribly bad. I don't know if I could do this in such a way as you'd be able to see. I popped this out last time while it was I had it propped up on a, well, what I did is I did this number. Let's see if I can do it while you're on camera. I apologize for the shakiness. If you have motion sickness and that makes you nauseous,